This notice requires you to provide the homeowners association with a key and unfettered access to the subterranean structure on your property for mandatory safety inspections, effective immediately. I read the line twice, the heavy cream-colored cardstock feeling absurdly formal in my calloused hand. The paper probably cost more than the sentiment behind it. Unfettered access. That was a $5 word for a 10-cent idea. An idea I had no intention of entertaining. I looked from the letter, with its imperious gold-embossed HOA logo, out the window to the structure in question. From the kitchen, all you could see was a gently sloping mound of earth covered in lush, manicured grass, with a heavy, steel-reinforced concrete door set into the side. It looked less like a building and more like a feature of the landscape, which was exactly the point. This house, this land, was supposed to be my quiet retreat from the world. After my wife, Martha, passed, the noise of the city became unbearable. Every street corner held a memory, every restaurant a ghost. So I sold our life's work, our construction business, and bought this plot on the edge of a subdivision called Willow Creek Estates. It was just far enough from the city to be quiet, but close enough for decent internet. I'd spent my life building things for other people. Skyscrapers that pierced the clouds, bridges that defied gravity, foundations that would outlast civilizations. I was a structural engineer, a man who understood stress and load, tolerances and breaking points. This house, the last one I would ever build, was for me. I designed it myself, poured the concrete, framed the walls. And most importantly, I built the shelter. Martha had always been terrified of tornadoes. Growing up in the plains, she'd seen what they could do. So, I promised her one day I'd build her a place so strong, so secure, that no storm could ever touch her. I finally built it, but she never got to see it. It was my monument to her, a fortress of solitude built from grief and reinforced concrete. But it was also my wine cellar. That was the part one didn't advertise. Down the concrete steps, past the airtight steel door, was a climate-controlled sanctuary. On one side were the emergency supplies, water, food, first aid kits, a generator. On the other, rack after rack of carefully curated wines, a collection Martha and I had started on our honeymoon. Every bottle was a story, a memory sealed in glass. And Brenda from, the self-appointed Queen of Willow Creek, wanted a key. I crumpled the notice into a tight ball. The satisfying crunch of the expensive paper was the first small victory in a war I hadn't even realized had been declared. I was a man who preferred peace. I paid my dues on time, mowed my lawn to the regulation 3 inches, and brought my trash cans in by the HOA-mandated hour of 5 post-Mary DM. I was a model resident. I had joined the community for its promise of quiet order, a place where the rules were supposed to create harmony, not serve the whims of a tyrant. But I was also a man who understood foundations. And I could already see the cracks in Brenda's. A few days passed. I did nothing. I treated the notice like a piece of junk mail, a misdirected offer for a timeshare in a place I never wanted to visit. Life went on. I worked in my garden, I tinkered with the old truck in my garage, and in the evenings, I'd retreat to my shelter, open a bottle of wine, and talk to Martha as if she were sitting right there with me. Then the second notice came. This one wasn't on fancy cardstock. It was on bright, obnoxious red paper, slipped into a plastic sleeve and hung on my doorknob. Final notice, it screamed in a blocky, aggressive font. Failure to comply with the HOA's safety inspection request for the unapproved subterranean structure will result in a fine of $100 per day, retroactive to the date of the first notice. Unapproved structure. My blood pressure, normally as steady as a concrete pier, ticked up a notch. I had submitted every blueprint, every permit, every engineering report to the county and, as a courtesy, to the HOA Architectural Review Committee before I even broke ground. It had all been approved, stamped, and filed away. I had the paperwork to prove it, organized in a 3-ring binder with the meticulousness of a man who builds things that can't be allowed to fail. I walked back inside, the red paper feeling hot in my hand, a brand of manufactured outrage. I went to my office, pulled the binder from the shelf, and found the approval letter. It was signed by the 3 members of the committee. One of the signatures was a florid, looping scrawl that was instantly recognizable, Brenda from. So she hadn't just forgotten. She was lying. This wasn't about safety. This was about power. I'd seen her in action at the one and only HOA meeting I'd bothered to attend. She ruled the room like a petty dictator, her voice a sharp, grating instrument she used to cut down anyone who dared question her interpretation of the sacred texts, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions. She'd spent 10 minutes eviscerating poor Mr. Henderson over the shade of beige he'd painted his mailbox. It was a masterful performance of meaningless authority. I, however, was not Mr. Henderson. And my storm shelter was not a mailbox. That afternoon, I drafted a polite, professional letter. I cited the specific article in the bylaws that governed architectural approvals. I attached a copy of the signed approval form. I referenced the county permit numbers. I stated, clearly and concisely, that the structure was fully approved and that the HOA had no legal standing to demand access without a court order based on probable cause of a violation. I sealed it in an envelope and mailed it to the official HOA post office box, certified mail, return receipt requested. I was giving her an off-ramp, a chance to back down gracefully. It was a professional courtesy, engineer to project manager, so to speak. Let her realize she'd made a procedural error and quietly drop the matter. That was my first mistake. Assuming Brenda operated on logic and procedure. A week later, my certified letter came back to me, unopened, with refused scrawled across the front in angry red marker. Taped to it was a bill from the HOA for $700 in noncompliance fines. The war was on. My initial annoyance began to curdle into a cold, simmering frustration. This wasn't a misunderstanding, this was a deliberate campaign of harassment. Why? I barely knew the woman. I kept to myself. I was the quiet widower at the end of the cul-de-sac. What could she possibly want? I started paying closer attention. I saw how she patrolled the neighborhood in her golf cart, a clipboard resting on the passenger seat, her eyes scanning for violations. A child's toy left on a lawn, a garden hose not perfectly coiled, a flag flown a day after a federal holiday. Each was an affront to her sense of order, an excuse to levy a fine and exert her control. The HOA wasn't a community organization, it was her personal fiefdom. The fines kept coming. Every few days, another white envelope appeared in my mailbox, the balance growing at $100 a day. It was like a metronome of malice. I filed each one away in a new binder, labeled simply Brenda. Then she escalated. One morning, I found a notice plastered to the heavy steel door of the shelter itself. It was a violation for unapproved landscaping, citing the mound of earth and grass covering the structure. The irony was so thick I could have used it for grout. The landscaping was part of the original, approved design, meant to integrate the shelter into the hillside. That was followed by a notice for my truck. My beautifully restored 1972 Ford F-100. It was my weekend project, my therapy. I kept it in the garage, but on a Saturday, I had backed it into the driveway to wash it. According to Brenda, it was a commercial vehicle, and was not allowed to be parked in public view for any length of time. She was digging, searching for any crack, any weakness she could exploit. The conflict was no longer about the shelter. It was about submission. She wanted me to bend the knee. I started my own project. I was an engineer. I dealt in data, in facts, in the unyielding laws of physics and regulations. I would apply that same methodology to Brenda. At night, after a quiet dinner, I would sit at my desk, the Brenda binder open, and I would begin my research. I started with the HOA's public documents. The bylaws, the meeting minutes, the annual budgets. I read them line by line, highlighting, cross-referencing. I was looking for patterns, for inconsistencies. The first thing I noticed was the landscaping contract. The HOA paid a staggering amount of money to a company called Prestige Lawn and Garden for basic mowing and upkeep of the common areas. The price seemed inflated, almost comically so. I did a quick search of state business records. The owner of Prestige Lawn and Garden was a man named Gary from Brenda's husband. My eyebrows shot up. It wasn't illegal, necessarily, but it was certainly a conflict of interest. I dug deeper, looking at the meeting minutes. The contract had been approved unanimously, with Brenda, as president, casting the deciding vote after a brief discussion. The minutes noted that she had disclosed her relationship. It was all technically above board, but it stank like cheap fertilizer. I kept digging. I pulled the public records for every house in the subdivision. Deeds, tax assessments, building permits. I created a spreadsheet, a map of the entire neighborhood in data form. I was looking for a structural flaw in her empire. Then came the turning point. The moment the game changed from a bureaucratic chess match into something far more serious. It was a Tuesday morning. I was in my workshop, sanding a piece of maple for a new bookshelf, when I heard a commotion outside. I looked out to see a large tow truck, its yellow lights flashing, backing up my driveway. Behind it, directing the driver with imperious hand gestures, was Brenda. My heart hammered against my ribs. The tow truck was lining up with my Ford. I threw the workshop door open and strode out, my mind racing. What the hell is going on? I demanded, my voice low and dangerous. Brenda turned, a smug, triumphant smile on her face. Your vehicle is in violation, Mr. Collins. Article 7, Section 4. Commercial vehicles. It's being impounded. It's a classic pickup truck, not a commercial vehicle. It's parked on my property. You have no authority to do this, I said, trying to keep my voice level, trying to channel the calm I used when explaining complex engineering problems to nervous clients. The HOA has full authority, she snapped, waving a piece of paper. It was another violation notice. You've been warned. Now, if you'll excuse us. The tow truck driver, a big man with a weary expression, looked from her to me, clearly uncomfortable. He knew this was wrong. If you hook up that truck, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, I will sue you, your company, and this woman personally. I will own that truck of yours by the time I'm done. That was for him. For Brenda, I had something else. And Brenda, I said, taking a step closer, forcing her to look me in the eye. This is a declaration of war. You have harassed me, fined me illegally, and now you are attempting to steal my property. You have pushed too far. I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Not fear, not yet. But uncertainty. She had expected me to yell, to argue, to be flustered. She had not expected cold, precise rage. She wavered for a second, then her face hardened. Tow it, she commanded the driver. But the driver had seen enough. He put his hands up. Look, lady, I'm not getting in the middle of this. This is a civil dispute. You need a court order. He got back in his truck, started the engine, and drove away, leaving Brenda standing alone in my driveway, her face a mask of incandescent fury. She turned on me, her finger jabbing the air. You will regret this. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Oh, I think I do, I said quietly, as I turned and walked back into my house. The line had been crossed. This was no longer about a key to my shelter. This was about my home, my property, my peace. She had tried to take something that mattered to me, not for any logical reason, but simply because she could. Because she thought her petty power gave her that right. That night, there was no wine. I sat in my office, the binder open, the spreadsheet glowing on my monitor. The time for passive resistance was over. The time for defense was over. It was time to go on the offensive. I was a builder. I knew that to bring down a structure, you don't hammer away at the walls. You find the load-bearing columns, you identify the foundational weaknesses, and you apply pressure until the whole thing collapses in on itself. Brenda from was a poorly constructed building, and I was about to perform a controlled demolition. My strategic plan began to take shape, a blueprint for justice. I called it Project Bedrock. The name felt right. It was about getting down to the solid, unshakable truth beneath all her lies and bluster. The first phase was observation. She had been watching me, so now I would watch her. I ordered a set of high-end, motion-activated security cameras, small, discreet units that could be easily hidden. They weren't for my general security, they were specifically for her. I placed one with a perfect view of my driveway and the shelter door. Another was tucked into the eaves of my roof, giving a wide-angle view of the street. A third I disguised in a birdhouse, aimed directly at her front door across the cul-de-sac. It felt a little cloak and dagger, but her attempt to tow my truck proved she was capable of escalating to property damage or theft. This was about documentation. Every interaction, every approach, every new violation notice she plastered on my property would be recorded in high-definition video and audio. In a war of his word against hers, the person with the videotape wins. The second phase was fortification. Not of my house, but of my case. I needed an ally, someone who understood the side of this fight that I didn't. I was an expert in bylaws and building codes, but not in criminal procedure. I thought of my neighbor 2 doors down, Bob. A retired police detective who spent his days tending to an immaculate rose garden. We'd exchanged pleasantries, but not much more. He seemed like a no-nonsense, straight shooter. The next afternoon, I walked over, a file folder in my hand. He was on his knees, carefully pruning a rose bush. "Bob," I started. He looked up, his eyes sharp and assessing. "I'm Frank Collins. I need some advice, and I was told you used to be on the force." He stood up, wiping his hands on a rag. "That was a long time ago. What's the trouble?" I spent the next 20 minutes laying it all out. The notices, the fines, the landscaping, the truck, the unopened certified letter. I showed him the binder, the pictures, the copy of Brenda's husband's business registration. He listened patiently, nodding, his expression unreadable. When I was finished, he let out a long, low whistle. "Son," he said, his voice a gravelly baritone. "You've kicked a hornet's nest. But it sounds like this hornet's nest is built out of rotten wood." He looked over the evidence again. "The conflict of interest with the landscaping contract is dirty, but probably not illegal if she disclosed it. The constant fines and harassment are a civil matter. The attempted tow was borderline, but she backed down. What you have here is a pattern of targeted harassment by an official of a corporation, which is what an HOA is. But you don't have a smoking gun. Not yet. So what do I do?" I asked. "You keep doing what you're doing," he said, a glint in his eye. "You document everything. You installed cameras? Good. Make sure the timestamps are accurate. And you set a trap." "A trap?" "She's obsessed with that shelter of yours," Bob explained. "She's convinced you're hiding something in there. A code violation, a business, a meth lab, who knows? Her kind of mind can't stand a secret. So, you give her a reason to escalate. You bait the hook." We spent another hour brainstorming. The plan was simple, elegant in its deviousness. I would use her obsession against her. Phase 3 was implementation, setting the trap. The next day, I made a point of carrying several large, expensive-looking Pelican cases from my truck down to the shelter. Anyone watching would assume they were full of valuable equipment, camera gear, firearms, who knows. In reality, they were filled with old textbooks from my college days. Heavy, but worthless. I did this in the middle of the day, making sure to look over my shoulder as if I were being watched. Then, I made a phone call. I sat on my back porch, my voice just loud enough to carry, and had a fake conversation with a non-existent friend. I talked about the new additions to my wine collection, mentioning a few ridiculously expensive French Bordeaux vintages. I complained about having to store them in the cellar because my home insurance wouldn't cover them unless they were in a secure, climate-controlled vault. I knew Brenda was a notorious gossip. If she didn't hear it herself, one of her neighborhood spies would. The bait was in the water. A locked room she was desperate to get into, now supposedly filled with thousands of dollars in uninsured, untraceable assets. I felt a grim satisfaction settle over me. This wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about justice. The methodical, satisfying process of building a case, laying each piece of evidence like a perfectly placed brick, was deeply appealing to the engineer in me. I was constructing a cage for her, and she was going to walk right into it. The waiting was the hardest part. For a week, nothing happened. More fines appeared in my mailbox, which I dutifully filed. Brenda's golf cart made its daily rounds, slowing as it passed my house, her gaze lingering on the shelter door. The cameras recorded it all. I checked the footage every night. It was a tedious catalog of normalcy, mail carriers, dog walkers, kids on bikes. And then, on the 8th night, I found it. The timestamp was 2:17 in the morning. The birdhouse camera showed Brenda, dressed in dark clothing, creeping across her lawn and over to mine. She was carrying a small toolkit. The camera I'd hidden near the shelter picked her up in perfect, infrared detail. She approached the heavy steel door and examined the lock, a high-security deadbolt I'd installed myself. She pulled out a set of lockpicks and went to work. My heart was pounding as I watched the footage. The sheer audacity was stunning. She was clumsy, clearly an amateur who'd watched a few too many videos online. She fumbled with the picks for nearly 10 minutes, her frustration growing visibly. She kept looking around, a paranoid twitch in her movements. Finally, she gave up on the lock and tried a small crowbar from her kit. The sound of metal scraping against reinforced steel was picked up clearly by the camera's microphone. It was a pathetic, tinny sound. The crowbar didn't even scratch the paint. Defeated, she kicked the door once, a childish display of temper, then scurried back to her house. I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile spreading across my face. I watched the footage again, and then a third time. It was perfect. Attempted breaking and entering. Destruction of property, minor though it was. Clear, undeniable, and beautifully captured in high definition. I had her. The smoking gun Bob had talked about. But I wasn't going to the police. Not yet. A criminal charge would be satisfying, but it wouldn't solve the larger problem. It wouldn't dismantle her power structure. This was just the first piece of the demolition. The next step was to use it to expose her to the very people who gave her power in the first place, the community. The annual HOA meeting was scheduled for the following week. It was usually a dull affair, poorly attended and dominated by Brenda's monologues about lawn maintenance. This year, I decided, it would be different. I spent the next few days preparing. I edited the camera footage into a short, compelling clip. I printed high-quality still frames showing her face, the lockpicks, the crowbar. I prepared a brief, factual statement, devoid of emotion. I also did something else. I sent a simple, anonymous email to a few of my neighbors, the ones I'd seen chafe under Brenda's rule, like Mr. Henderson of the beige mailbox fame. The email said only, if you are unhappy with the current HOA management, you should attend the annual meeting on Tuesday. There will be a presentation you won't want to miss. The night of the meeting, the community clubhouse was more crowded than I'd ever seen it. Word had clearly spread. A buzz of anticipation hung in the air like static. I saw Mr. Henderson in the front row, a look of nervous excitement on his face. Brenda stood at the podium, basking in the attention. She clearly thought the high turnout was a testament to her leadership. She beamed, her demeanor radiating smug authority. Welcome, everyone. It's so wonderful to see so many engaged community members here tonight, she began, her voice dripping with false sincerity. She droned on for half an hour, going through the budget, celebrating her accomplishments, a new pet waste station, a sternly worded newsletter about holiday decorations. I sat patiently in the back, my laptop bag at my feet. Finally, she came to the end of her agenda. And that concludes the board's presentation. Are there any items of new business? She scanned the room, her eyes daring anyone to speak. This was my cue. I stood up. I have an item of new business. All eyes turned to me. Brenda's smile tightened. Mr. Collins. Of course. I assume this is about your delinquent fines. No, I said, my voice calm and carrying through the silent room. This is about HOA security. And the protection of private property. I walked to the front of the room. I've prepared a short presentation. Before she could object, I connected my laptop to the projector. The screen, which had been displaying the HOA budget, flickered to life. The first image was a crystal-clear still frame from the infrared camera. It showed a figure in dark clothing crouched in front of my shelter door, a tool in their hand. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Over the past several weeks, I began, my voice steady, my property has been the subject of a targeted campaign of harassment, culminating in an attempted burglary last week. Brenda found her voice. It was shrill, laced with panic. This is outrageous. You can't even tell who that is. This is slander. Please, allow me to continue, I said, not looking at her. I clicked to the next slide. It was a zoomed-in shot of the person's face, illuminated for a moment as they looked up toward a noise. It was unmistakably Brenda. The room erupted in murmurs. People were turning to look at her, their expressions a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. The incident occurred at 2:17 in the morning, I continued, my voice a calm counterpoint to the growing chaos. The individual attempted to pick the lock on my shelter door and, failing that, tried to pry it open with a crowbar, causing minor damage. I clicked again, and the video began to play. The silent, damning footage filled the screen. The entire room watched, mesmerized, as their HOA president attempted to break into a resident's property in the dead of night. The pathetic scrape of the crowbar against steel was audible even in the low-quality microphone audio, a sound of impotent rage. When the video ended, I turned to face the room. This is not about fines or landscaping. This is about a gross abuse of power. The person elected to protect our property values and enforce our community rules is, in fact, a criminal who attempts to break into our homes when she doesn't get her way. Brenda was apoplectic. Her face was blotchy and red, her carefully constructed composure shattered. Lies, she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. That video is fake. It's doctored. He's a liar. He's trying to destroy this community. Her denial was too frantic, her rage too raw. No one was buying it. They had seen the evidence with their own eyes. The social credibility she had so carefully cultivated evaporated in an instant. I am calling for an immediate vote of no confidence in our president, Brenda I said, my voice ringing with authority. And I am submitting this evidence to the police to pursue criminal charges. The room descended into chaos. People were shouting, arguing. Mr. Henderson was on his feet, yelling, I second the motion. Others joined in. Brenda stood at the podium, cornered and exposed. But she wasn't defeated. The rage in her eyes was morphing into something else, something cold and venomous. She looked directly at me, her voice dropping to a hiss that cut through the noise. You've just signed your own death warrant, Collins. You have no idea what's coming for you. With that, she grabbed her purse and stormed out of the clubhouse, shoving people out of her way. The meeting ended without a formal vote, the community members too stunned and divided to proceed. I had won the battle, but her final threat hung in the air. She had lost her credibility, but she hadn't lost her power. Not yet. And I knew, with the certainty of an engineer reading a stress fracture, that she would retaliate. The structure was groaning under the strain. But it hadn't collapsed yet. The final, vicious escalation was still to come. The fallout from the meeting was immediate and ugly. The neighborhood fractured. Some people avoided my gaze, crossing the street when they saw me coming. They were afraid of Brenda, of the power she still wielded. Others gave me a subtle nod of support, a quiet "good for you" muttered as we passed. A small but vocal minority, her loyal cronies, took up her cause, defending her on the neighborhood social media page, parroting her claims that my video was a deep fake. Brenda, for her part, went quiet for a few days. The golf cart patrols stopped. No new fines appeared in my mailbox. It was an eerie, unnerving silence, the calm before the storm. I knew she was planning something. A wounded animal is at its most dangerous. I took the video evidence to Bob. He watched it, a grim look on his face. You did good, Frank, he said. You exposed her. But she's not going to take this lying down. A public humiliation like that. For a narcissist, that's worse than a prison sentence. She's going to come after you with everything she's got. I filed a police report, I told him. They took a statement, but they said without more damage or a successful entry, it's a misdemeanor at best. They'll look into it, I made air quotes. Bob snorted. Yeah, that's what I figured. It's your word against hers, video or not. Her lawyer will tear it apart. You need more. You need something she can't spin. Something that hits her where it really hurts. Her wallet. I guessed. Exactly, Bob said. That landscaping contract. It stinks, but you can't prove anything is illegal. You need to find the rot underneath. His words echoed in my head. I went back to my research, digging deeper into the financial records, the contracts, the web of businesses connected to the Frums. But it was a dead end. Everything was just clean enough, just legal enough, to be untouchable. Then Brenda launched her counteroffensive. It was more vicious, more personal than I could have imagined. It started with a call from my former business partner. Frank, what the hell is going on over there? He asked, his voice tight with concern. I just got a call from someone at your HOA. They said they were doing a community safety check and wanted to know if you had a history of workplace instability or aggressive behavior. My blood ran cold. She was trying to poison my professional reputation, the name I had spent 40 years building. A few days later, a van from animal control pulled into my driveway. A stern-faced woman got out with a clipboard. "Sir, we've received an anonymous complaint about a neglected dog at this address. Barking incessantly, signs of malnourishment." I just pointed to my golden retriever, Buster, who was happily chasing a butterfly on the lawn, his coat gleaming and his tail wagging furiously. The complaint was absurd, but the intent was clear: to harass me, to sic government agencies on me, to bury me in bureaucratic nonsense. The final straw, the attack that went beyond the pale, came the following week. It was a letter. Not from the HOA, but from Child Protective Services. An anonymous tip had been called in. It alleged that when my young grandchildren came to visit on weekends, I was often intoxicated and that the home environment was unsafe, citing the unstable, unpermitted structure in the backyard. I stared at the letter, my hands shaking with a rage so pure it felt like ice in my veins. My grandchildren were my world. They were the only pure joy left in my life after Martha was gone. To use them, to twist my love for them into a weapon against me, it was monstrous. It was an act of pure evil. This was her endgame. To paint me as a dangerous, unstable old man. To isolate me, to discredit me so completely that no one would ever believe me about the break-in, about the fines, about any of it. She wasn't just trying to win, she was trying to annihilate me. I sat at my desk for a long time that night, the CPS letter on the desk in front of me. The anger was still there, a white-hot coal in my chest. But beneath it, a strange clarity began to form. She had made a fatal mistake. She had mistaken my patience for weakness. She had mistaken my methodical nature for hesitation. She had shown me that there were no rules she would not break, no lines she would not cross. And in doing so, she had freed me from my own self-imposed rules of engagement. Project Bedrock was no longer about a controlled demolition. It was about razing the entire site to the ground and salting the earth. Just when I was at my lowest point, convinced I was fighting a battle I couldn't win, my salvation came in the form of a tentative knock on my front door. I opened it to find a woman I didn't recognize. She was in her late 50s, with nervous eyes and a file folder clutched to her chest like a shield. "Mr. Collins," she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "My name is Sarah. I used to be the bookkeeper for Gary from's construction company. Can I come in?" I ushered her inside, my mind racing. She sat on the edge of my sofa, refusing a glass of water, her hands trembling slightly. "I saw what happened at the HOA meeting," she began, looking at her hands. "A friend of mine was there. She told me what you did, how you stood up to Brenda." She took a deep breath. "I was fired 2 months ago. I worked for Gary for 15 years. He fired me because I started asking questions. Questions about the invoices. Specifically, the invoices for the Willow Creek HOA. My heart started beating faster. This was it. The rot Bob had told me to find." Sarah opened the file folder on her lap. It was filled with copies of invoices, receipts, and ledger pages. "Brenda and Gary have a system," she explained, her voice gaining confidence as she laid out the facts. "Prestige Lawn and Garden, Gary's landscaping company, is mostly legitimate. But he has another company, a shell corporation called Suburban Infrastructure Solutions. It has a mailing address at a post office box and no actual employees." She pointed to a stack of invoices. "Every month, the HOA pays Prestige for landscaping. But they also pay SIS for common area maintenance, things like storm drain inspection, regrading of retention pond, underground conduit repair, vague, technical-sounding jobs. And these jobs never happened." I asked, my voice tight. "They never happened," she confirmed. "I handled the books. The money would go from the HOA account to the SIS account. Gary would then transfer it to his personal accounts. It's been happening for years, since Brenda was first elected president. They've embezzled over $200,000 from the residents of this neighborhood. It was all there. A systematic, long-term campaign of fraud and embezzlement. She had copies of the fake invoices, the bank transfer records she'd managed to print before she was fired. It was a prosecutor's dream. "Why are you doing this now?" I asked her, my voice gentle. A tear rolled down her cheek. "Because they ruined me. Gary didn't just fire me, he blackballed me. He told people I was incompetent, that I had a drinking problem. I haven't been able to find another job. And when I heard what Brenda was doing to you, the lies about your family, it was the same thing she did to me. I couldn't stay silent anymore." The whistleblower. The final, critical piece of the puzzle. The next morning, Sarah, Bob, and I walked into the district attorney's office. We didn't go to the front desk. Bob had made a call to a former colleague, a senior investigator in the white-collar crime division. We spent 4 hours laying out the entire story. My binder of fines and videos. Sarah's folder of financial documents. Bob's experienced commentary on how to build the case. The investigator listened, his expression growing more and more grim. He took copies of everything. When we were done, he looked at me. "Mr. Collins," he said, "your HOA president is a piece of work. But what you've brought us here, this is wire fraud, mail fraud, and grand larceny. This goes way beyond a neighborhood dispute." He turned to Sarah. "Ma'am, you're very brave. Your testimony and these documents are the foundation of this case." As we left the building, the sun felt brighter. The air felt cleaner. The weight of the past few months began to lift from my shoulders. The trap was set. The authorities were involved. All that was left was the final showdown. The DA's office moved quickly and quietly. They subpoenaed the bank records for the HOA, for Prestige, and for the shell company. They got a warrant for the firm's personal accounts. The picture Sarah had painted was confirmed in stark, undeniable detail. The investigator called me a week later. "We're ready to move," he said. "We have everything we need to indict. But we want to make it clean. We want to catch her in the act, if possible. The last piece is motive. Why was she so obsessed with getting into your shelter?" "She thought I was hiding valuables," I explained. "Uninsured wine." The investigator was silent for a moment. "I have an idea," he said. "A way to arrange a final performance. Are you willing to help us spring the trap? After what she did to my family?" I said. "I'll do whatever it takes." And so, the stage was set for the final act. At my request, backed by a petition signed by over half the neighborhood, a special emergency HOA meeting was called. The stated purpose was to address resident concerns regarding presidential conduct and to review security protocols. The flyer I posted on the community message board was deliberately vague but tantalizing. The meeting was to be held in the same clubhouse where she had been exposed. I wanted the symmetry. I wanted her downfall to happen in the very room where she had held court for years. The night of the meeting, the atmosphere was electric. The room was packed, standing room only. This time, there was no division. The story of the CPS call had leaked, and it had horrified everyone. Even her former supporters looked at her with suspicion and disgust. Brenda arrived, flanked by her husband Gary. She looked pale but defiant, dressed in a severe power suit, armor for her last stand. She still believed she could control this, that she could bully her way out of it. In the back of the room, seated discreetly among the residents, were 2 plainclothes detectives from the DA's office, including the lead investigator I had met with. Bob was sitting near the front, a small, satisfied smile on his face. I had been given the floor to start the meeting. I stood at the podium, a single manila folder in my hand. The room fell silent. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice even. "We are here tonight to discuss the leadership of this community. We've all seen the video of our president attempting to break into my home. We've heard the stories of harassment. And some of you have experienced it firsthand." I paused, letting my words sink in. "But I'm here to tell you that this was never about a key to my storm shelter. It was about something else entirely. It was about greed." I opened the folder. "For the past 5 years, our HOA has been systematically defrauded by its own president and her husband." I laid it all out. The shell company, Suburban Infrastructure Solutions. The fake invoices for work that was never done. I had put together a simple presentation, a flowchart showing exactly how the money moved from the HOA's account into the firm's pockets. As I spoke, I projected copies of the fake invoices and the bank statements onto the screen. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable. A low growl of anger began to build in the room. People were looking at their own HOA fee statements, realizing their money had been stolen to fund the firm's lavish lifestyle. Gary started to sweat, his face turning ashen. Brenda, however, was made of sterner stuff. "This is absurd," she shouted from her seat. "More lies and fabricated documents from a disgruntled old man. You have no proof." "Oh, but I do," I said calmly. I looked toward the back of the room and nodded. Sarah stood up and walked to the front. She took the podium, her voice shaking but clear. "My name is Sarah, and I was the bookkeeper. I prepared these invoices. I processed these transfers. I did it on Gary Firm's direct orders." She told her story. The whole room listened, captivated. When she was done, the room was silent for a moment, and then the dam of resident anger broke. The noise was deafening. Shouts of "thief" and "resign" filled the air. Brenda was on her feet, her face a contorted mask of pure hatred. She wasn't looking at the crowd. She was looking at me. "You," she screamed, her voice cracking. "You did this. You couldn't just pay your fines and follow the rules. You had to poke and pry. This is all your fault." And then, in her blind rage, she gave us the final piece we needed. She incriminated herself completely. That money was ours. We deserved it. Do you have any idea what it takes to run this place? To deal with people like you day in and day out? The endless complaints, the petty problems. That was our compensation. We earned it. A collective gasp went through the room. A full confession, shouted for all to hear. The lead investigator stood up from the back of the room, his badge now hanging from a chain around his neck. "Brenda he said, his voice cutting through the noise like a surgeon's scalpel. "You are under arrest for grand larceny, wire fraud, and conspiracy." The second detective moved toward Gary. The color drained from Brenda's face. The reality of the situation finally crashed down on her. It was over. The house of cards had collapsed. Her breakdown was spectacular. She started screaming, a wild, incoherent tirade of threats and curses. She lunged toward me, but the investigator intercepted her easily, cuffing her hands behind her back. As they led her out of the clubhouse, a sobbing, defeated mess, she twisted her head to look at me one last time. Her eyes were filled with a venomous, impotent rage. "You'll pay for this, Collins," she shrieked, the words echoing in the stunned silence. "I'll see you in hell." It was the last, hollow threat from a queen who had been permanently dethroned. The aftermath was swift and decisive. The community, finally liberated from Brenda's reign of terror, began to heal. A new HOA board was elected, a group of sensible, reasonable people that included Mr. Henderson. One of their first acts was to formally abolish the long list of petty, intrusive rules Brenda had created. The second was to issue a formal apology to me and to waive all the fraudulent fines she had levied. The legal process ground on, but the outcome was never in doubt. Faced with the mountain of evidence and their own public confessions, Brenda and Gary took a plea deal. They were sentenced to 7 years in state prison. They were forced to pay back every cent they had stolen, over $250,000 with interest and penalties. Their house went into foreclosure to cover the restitution. Their company was dissolved. They lost everything. Total, complete ruin. Sarah, the whistleblower, became a local hero. She was hired by the new HOA board as an independent auditor to clean up the financial mess the firms had left behind, a job she accepted with quiet dignity. I became something of a reluctant hero myself. People would stop me in the street to thank me. I was asked to join the new board, but I politely declined. I hadn't done any of this to be a community leader. I had done it to be left alone. My life returned to the peace I had sought when I first moved here. The quiet mornings in my garden, the afternoons in my workshop, the steady, predictable rhythm of a simple life. The neighborhood itself seemed to breathe easier, the oppressive atmosphere of constant surveillance and judgment replaced by a sense of genuine community. Sometimes, in the evening, I would take a bottle of wine and go down to my shelter. The heavy steel door would swing shut behind me, sealing out the world. Down in the cool, quiet dark, surrounded by my memories and the fruits of my victory, I would pour a glass. I would sit there and reflect on the strange journey I'd been on. I had built this place as a sanctuary from the storms of nature. I never imagined I would need it as a fortress against the storms of human pettiness and greed. It had started with a ridiculous demand for a key and ended with the complete dismantling of a corrupt little empire. It was a lesson in foundations. A structure built on lies, ego, and intimidation is no structure at all. It's just a facade waiting for a single, well-placed charge to bring the whole thing down. Brenda thought she was a force of nature, an unstoppable tornado of rules and regulations. But in the end, she was just a bully who picked a fight with a man who knew how to build things to last. I raised my glass in the silent, concrete room. A toast to Martha, a toast to quiet perseverance, and a toast to the simple, satisfying beauty of poetic justice. My peace had been threatened, but I had fought for it. And now, sitting in my shelter, my wine cellar, my fortress of solitude, I was finally, truly, at home. The silence was no longer eerie, it was earned. It was the sound of peace.